Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to briefly talk about bottom-up modeling approaches, some of the work certainly that we've been doing here at Oak Ridge, but in general, I think this is an important problem to discuss, especially in light of some of the issues with modeling population to begin with, and I think Joshua highlighted some of those there in his last slide. So, the big question is, where is everybody? And the interesting part about that is it's 2019 and we still don't know. There's been a lot of technological advancements, certainly in the last century since this map on the right was produced, showing the world's inhabitants. But even with all the new data and methods that are available to us, population estimation is still a challenge. So the quality, the accuracy, the currency of censuses across the world are varying. Boundaries and other spatial location identifiers are also varying in quality, but even if you find good quality spatial information, you still don't know if they're going to be temporally consistent with the population counts that you have available. And then at the end of the day, we're talking about humans, and so there's obviously population dynamics that are involved here. And particularly for places where they're experiencing rapid growth or change, conflict or crisis areas, or places that are affected by natural hazards. It's very difficult to capture those population dynamics and really get a good estimate of population in those areas. And the other important thing to note is that a lot of the traditional accounting, so things like census, of people are still primarily residence-based. So that does mean that you're not really taking into account the full activity space of humans. So moving forward, let me click my slide here. I just want to briefly touch on the two traditional ways that we've estimated population in the past. Most people are probably familiar with the top-down estimation, which is a census disaggregation. If you're familiar with Landscan or WorldPop or GPW, some of those products, they take a known population count subnationally and disaggregate that based on other information. And that's possible where you have high quality or a recent census, but where you don't, and that's a lot of places in the world, what we are really starting to think about and approach is how to do bottom-up population estimation, and that is take more information in a data-driven approach to capture the where, what, the who, so that you can have a census-independent population where your census is not of great quality. And so what does this mean? Bottom up, as I mentioned, is very data-driven. And so at the end of the day, we need to be able to capture key information from a variety of data sets. One of the keys to this is to take advantage of all the high-resolution imagery that's coming online every day. So when you're dealing with sub-meter imagery, there's a lot of information that you can glean from that. Certainly not all the information that you would need to estimate population, but to get that spatial footprint of where humans occupy the world, so whether it's building areas, whether it's settlement areas, to really just start to understand the where at a very high resolution. Beyond that, we also want to capture things about those settlements and those buildings. So, getting closer towards the what. What are the differences in those settlement patterns, the density, the formality, those types of information that'll help us understand not just what's going on there, but how that translates to population. So people occupy space differently, right? And then taking into account any kind of information that'll give us a little bit more perspective on the area. So we might know a building footprint, but without the height, it's hard to estimate the area that's captured in terms of population distribution. So taking advantage of building heights, any open source information. Certainly points of interest are really important because then you can start capturing not just the space and the spatial footprint of human activity, but also what's going on there, how that translates to people over time. And then finally, one of the keys here, although it's not that highlighted on this slide, is population density. As I mentioned, people don't occupy space the same everywhere. That's not just in terms of different formalities or types of settlement, but also across the world. So you could have a really large residence in some parts of the world that would have very few people that actually live there, Conversely, in different parts of the world, very large residences equal a lot more people. And so we want to be able to capture those cultural variations to be able to come up with a high-resolution population estimate from all of that collection of data that goes into that. And so, you know, bringing all these data sets together, and certainly to do it at scale, and by at scale I mean do this globally, is very challenging. We have the fastest supercomputer in the world right now at Oak Ridge called Summit, but at the end of the day, compute is our smallest challenge, really. So if you think about just the feature extraction aspect of this alone, things like data storage and access, one of the challenges that you'll have right off the bat is in terms of just storing and accessing that imagery. So for a medium-sized country, you're already looking at somewhere around 50 terabytes of raw imagery just to process. So those types of challenges are certainly, you know, not insurmountable. The compute is not insurmountable, but then you get into the data integration considerations. And of course, I think everybody on this call is very familiar with this type of concern where you're taking different data extents, different geometry types, complexity. You're doing this big data fusion where, you know, there's a lot of mismatches. So at the end of the day, if you have different temporally stamped information, what is your ground condition? Is that a data set as of 2017? Is that a data set as of 2018? How do you capture that type of information and put it all together? You'll always have those incongruous spatial and temporal resolutions to deal with when you do a bottom-up approach. And, you know, I think something that people don't often consider are privacy issues. So when you're combining all these data sets together, you know, we often think about it in terms of authoritative data and how we're protecting privacy, but there are the chances that you could combine data sets that will expose privacy in some cases. So that has to be a consideration. And last but not least, validation. It's very difficult to validate population estimates at high resolution to begin with, you know, mostly because of the aspect of population dynamics. Ultimately, estimates are typically a snapshot in time. But when you look at this from the perspective of a bottom-up modeling approach, validation becomes even more challenging. And so to finish up, you know, the goal here being global bottom-up population estimates, we've done this for several countries at Oak Ridge, and we're finding new challenges and new opportunities every day. But there's a couple things that we know for sure. We have to keep pursuing the scalable techniques for extracting these features, and that can be, you know, buildings, that can be neighborhoods, that can be different settlement types. But we also have to be able to have a formal curation of how population occupies space. So it will do us no good to be able to know where people are if we're just going to spread them all equally like peanut butter, correct? So beyond that, I think everybody can agree that we can develop all the population estimates in the world, but if we don't have some measure of data quality and uncertainty that we can provide to the user community, it becomes difficult to use that and trust that data. So that's the third bullet, but obviously not the least important. Thank you.